You didn't ignore the signs because you were foolish. You ignored them because you had hope. There's a difference between being blind and choosing to believe in someone's potential. When we care about someone, we often see not who they are today, but who they could become if they just put in the effort. That hope becomes a filter, blurring the red flags into softer shades of pink. You excused the inconsistency, rationalized the lack of effort, and told yourself, he's just going through something. You weren't blind, you were giving him grace, but the problem with grace is that when it's one-sided, it becomes a gift we keep giving to someone who's not giving anything back. And eventually, that gift becomes a burden, one you carry silently while pretending everything's okay. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in a relationship isn't the other person's bad behavior, it's your beautiful imagination. You saw glimpses of connection, chemistry, maybe even care. You clung to those rare, fleeting moments as proof that something real existed. Every time he showed up, late, half-hearted, distracted, you still found a way to make it mean something. You told yourself he's trying, but deep down you knew it wasn't enough, and that knowing, the quiet discomfort in your gut, wasn't blindness. It was intuition you chose to suppress, because the truth would hurt more than the illusion. You didn't want to believe he didn't care as much as you did. And that's okay. It's okay that you wanted it to be something more. It's okay that you hoped he would change. That's not weakness. That's humanity. We're wired to believe in stories, and sometimes we stay in bad ones because we're waiting for the plot twist. But relationships aren't fiction. They're not a movie where the cold, distant guy suddenly wakes up and realizes he can't live without you. In real life, someone who truly values you doesn't make you guess. They don't keep you in limbo, questioning your worth. You only stayed because your heart was in it. And when your heart is in something, your eyes will always try to adjust to the darkness, hoping the light comes on. You may have replayed conversations, reread messages, tried to decode his mixed signals. That wasn't blindness, that was effort. Effort to understand, effort to fix, effort to salvage what you believed had potential, but you can't decode someone who's not trying to be clear. You can't fix a relationship when only one person is invested in doing the work, and you certainly can't build a future on maybes, half-truths, and emotional breadcrumbs. He didn't need you to understand him, he needed you confused, because confusion kept you around. You were never blind, you were trying to make sense of the senseless, and that takes a deeply caring person. You might think, how did I not see it? But the truth is you did. You saw the last-minute plans, the missed calls, the emotional unavailability. You saw it all, but you filtered it through love, through fear, through the desire not to start over again. That's not blindness, it's fatigue. It's exhaustion from another investment gone wrong. When your heart is tired, it will settle, not because it doesn't know better, but because it's desperate for something to finally work. You didn't ignore the signs, you just didn't know how to walk away from the potential of what could be. This is what makes walking away so difficult. It's not just leaving a person. It's leaving the idea of what you thought you were building together. You weren't blind to who he was. You were loyal to who you believed he might become. That version of him existed in your imagination, and it felt so real that letting it go feels like mourning someone who never fully showed up. You poured into someone who left you half full, and you convinced yourself it was enough. Not because you didn't see what was missing, but because you hoped that if you gave more, he'd eventually match your energy. That's not blindness, that's faith misdirected. If anything, your blindness was actually emotional bravery. You loved without holding back. You invested without a guarantee. And that's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to understand. Because now you get to see clearly, not just what he did, but what you did in response. You get to learn what hope looks like when it's misused. You get to take accountability, not for being used, but for staying too long, and in doing so, you reclaim your power. Because clarity doesn't come from blaming yourself for not seeing. It comes from forgiving yourself for seeing and still choosing to stay. When you stop calling it blindness, you start healing. You stop thinking, how could I be so stupid? And start saying, I was doing the best I could with what I felt. That's a powerful shift. It allows you to have compassion for the version of you that held on, and strength for the version of you that's ready to let go. You weren't blind, you were hopeful, loving, committed. Those aren't flaws, but now you get to add something else to that list: awareness. Awareness of how love should feel: mutual, secure, and clear, not confusing, one-sided, or filled with excuses. He told you he cared, but he didn't show up when it counted. He said you were important, but his actions didn't match the weight of those words. That's the thing about people who use you. They often sound convincing. They say just enough to keep you holding on, but do just little enough to never move things forward. You were waiting for consistency, but all you got was a roller coaster. A good morning text followed by days of silence. A compliment here, then a cancelled plan there. You thought the words meant something, they felt sincere in the moment. But sincerity without follow-through is manipulation dressed as affection. And when someone's behavior is inconsistent, it's not by accident. It's by design. When a man truly cares, you don't need to analyze his every move. You don't spend your nights asking, what did that mean? Or replaying conversations in your head for hidden clues. He makes it obvious not through grand gestures, but through reliability. He shows up, not just when it's convenient or when he wants something, but even when it requires effort. He includes you in his world and makes space for yours. The guy who wants you in his life doesn't leave you wondering. But the one who's using you, he's always just engaged enough to keep you emotionally invested, yet distant enough to avoid commitment. He feeds you moments of attention to keep you craving more. You got stuck in a loop of decoding rather than connecting. You weren't in a relationship, you were in a constant state of translation. Every vague message became a puzzle to solve. Every hot and cold shift turned into a guessing game. That's not love, that's emotional fatigue. A man who values you doesn't want you confused. He wants you secure. He makes it clear where you stand, and he takes the ambiguity off the table. If you have to keep asking your friends, is this normal? It probably isn't. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum, and he still couldn't deliver it consistently. The truth is, consistency doesn't lie. It doesn't make excuses. It doesn't need backup explanations or context. It simply shows up. You could have ignored the sweet nothings if the actions had matched, but you fell for the potential he sold through his words. The potential of what the relationship could be if only he followed through. But potential isn't real unless it turns into effort. And when someone only gives you promises with no proof, they're not interested in building a future. They're interested in maintaining control. Every "I miss you" without a plan to see you, every "you mean so much" followed by silence. It's all performance. You felt connected to his words because they spoke to your needs. He knew exactly what to say to make you feel seen, even if he had no intention of acting on it. That's the tactic of someone who understands emotional leverage. He gave just enough kindness to keep your hope alive, and just enough distance to avoid responsibility. And hope is powerful. It can convince you that every small act is a sign of change, but a man who wants to change shows it through behavior, not apologies. Repeated apologies with no growth aren't redemption, they're manipulation, a tool to buy time and stall your exit. You probably kept thinking, maybe if I'm more patient, he'll be ready. You thought your understanding would inspire consistency. But love doesn't work like that. You can't love someone into being reliable. You can't sacrifice your standards for the sake of their comfort. Real love requires both people to show up, not just one person making all the emotional effort. You were giving loyalty to someone giving you convenience. He showed up when he was lonely, when he was bored, or when he feared losing control, but never when you needed him most. And that pattern wasn't invisible, it was just painful to accept. The hardest part wasn't seeing the lack of effort. It was accepting that someone who said they cared didn't care enough to act like it. That's the emotional disconnect. The words felt true, but the reality never aligned. You were trying to reconcile the person he said he was with the person he showed you he was. And that tension kept you stuck. You hoped consistency would come. You kept waiting for him to prove you right. But instead, he kept proving you wrong. Slowly, subtly, and with just enough warmth to keep you from walking away. That's not love. That's control wrapped in comfort. When someone's serious about you, they don't make you ask twice. They don't play tug-of-war with your emotions. Their presence is predictable, not occasional. You know when you'll hear from them. You know they'll follow through. You feel calm, not anxious. But you got used to inconsistency, so it started to feel like passion. The emotional ups and downs became your new normal, and in that chaos, you lost your sense of what healthy even looks like. But the truth is, love isn't supposed to be confusing, and someone who keeps you in confusion doesn't deserve access to your clarity. You didn't demand too much. You settled for too little, and you did it because the inconsistency made you chase the highs. It created a cycle where the rare good moments felt euphoric, like rewards for enduring the bad ones. But that's not intimacy, it's addiction. Emotional inconsistency